Hi. So I got an interesting question yesterday. My friend asked me, are eclipses good vibes or bad vibes? And I thought it was such a good question and so relevant that I thought I would just take a moment to just share about it, share my perspective on this here in case it's, in case anyone else is curious about this. So, right, are eclipses good vibes or bad vibes? In my perspective, I don't know that anything in astrology is good or bad. I think that it's all neutral, like perfectly neutral in a way that as people, humans that experience good and bad in a very real way, it's actually really hard for us to fathom something that's perfectly neutral like that. And there's so much that I want to say around this, so I'm trying to speak to it as it kind of comes through. So part of this, the reason that I think that, I don't know if anything in astrology is good or bad, is because what we're talking about, right now, with this example, we're talking about a solar eclipse, right? The moon moving in front of the sun, right? And blocking out its light for a moment. That event is so much older than any human conception of good and bad. Astrological events are so much older than our understanding of good and bad. They have existed long before good and bad even existed. Right? They're a lot older than the ideas of good and bad. And when we just take that reality in, because it's just true, right? The words good and bad didn't exist until eons after, the sun and the moon were moving this way. All the planets have been moving this way. And so much time later, we invented the ideas of good and bad, right? We had these experiences of good and bad in a human experience in a human body, right? We started experiencing good and bad. That's not to say good and bad don't exist. I do think that people experience good and bad, but these things that we're talking about kind of exist outside of that. They're older than that. They don't experience good and bad. The moon doesn't experience good and bad. The sun doesn't experience good and bad, right? So when we think about it that way, I find that it's easier to kind of start to play with and start to click into this idea of astrology being a neutral thing, which I know it's hard to imagine, but remembering that this is old can help us do that. So, right, we have that kind of in mind in the background, right? This stuff is so much older than good and bad is. And there's also something marvelous about it, right? So that's not to dismiss it as nothing. I'm not saying it's not potent, it's not powerful stuff. I'm just saying it's not indicative of good or bad. But if you think about what's happening today, right? Solar eclipse, the moon moving in front of the sun. And like in some places, right, you'll see it in totality, right? It's going to completely cover up the sun. For that to even happen, that is extremely remarkable, because it means that from where we are on Earth, the size of the sun, where it is, and the size of the moon, they have the same perceived size, circumference, radius, all that goodness, right? That isn't a given. Other planets that have a sun and a moon and have eclipses, they might not experience a total eclipse like that, because if their moon is big, then it would just easily block out the sun. But if it was small, then it wouldn't completely cover up the sun during an eclipse. So for this to even happen perfectly, for them to line up perfectly like that, is inherently remarkable. That's pretty miraculous, pretty uncommon and rare. So there is something remarkable, right? Miraculous, powerful, amazing, magical about these astrological events. And we can still hold that, and that it's not necessarily good or bad, right? There's kind of a neutral, kind of magical quality about it. People have been fascinated by these events for a really long time. So there's something fascinating, there's something magical, and we can also kind of hold it in this neutrality, right? This awe-inspiring neutrality. So we have all of this. And there's one more thing I want to speak to. So we have all of this, and with this distance we have, right? The planets, astrology being so much older than good and bad, and being literally far away from us, there's this thing that feels so real. The planets, in their neutrality, in their distance, in their unfathomable kind of like magic, they become a really fantastic canvas to project upon. That's an important thing to notice. Do they serve as really beautiful symbols for what could be happening? Are they good symbols to describe energies within and without, right, in the world and how we experience things? Yeah, remarkably, yeah, I think so. And some people might not think that, and that's fine. That's super valid too. But if you are someone that like believes in astrology, right, and thinks that, okay, yeah, these bodies, these celestial bodies are symbols that can describe some of the energies we might be feeling. If that's you, then it's really easy to just project whatever is in here onto this really magnificent neutral canvas. And I don't think that that's necessarily a bad thing. In fact, if you're aware that you're doing that, right, the eclipse is happening, it's bad. The eclipse is happening, it's good. Noticing what you are projecting onto this neutral canvas can be more illuminating than whatever is happening in the sky. So I think that's something to pay attention to. And again, it's not bad. It's not bad to project onto stuff. It's a really valuable source of inner information. So if you're looking to these events to tell you what's going on, is something good or bad happening, you can do that. And I invite you to notice, what is it that you're projecting onto these neutral celestial bodies? What are you projecting onto the blank neutral canvas of space? Right? What are the planets telling you, and what are you telling the planets through what you think they mean? Because that is, I think, even more valuable than whatever the planets are saying. So just something to notice. And it's really easy to get caught up in good and bad and oh my God, and to get freaked out when big events like this, very visible events like this happen, because everyone starts to talk about it. It gets a lot of hype. There's a lot of energy in the collective air just talking about the events, and lots of people have opinions. And usually I don't share my opinions because of this reason. There's already so much noise. And so if we get caught up in that like charge, right? There's a lot of charge around the eclipse because so many people are talking about it. The charge around that can be scary. It can be a lot to hold. And so we can think of it like, oh, this huge thing is happening and it's scary. But actually, it's not scary. There's just a lot of collective energy around it. It's not that the eclipse is bad or good. It's just happening. It just is. It's a magnificent neutral event. And I could go on, and maybe I'll one day teach a workshop on this, but I think these are the things to just be aware of. Like, be aware that there's a lot of collective energy in the space around these events, and to not get swept up in that. Not to get swept up in, the charge of other people's opinions around these things, because it can really, dysregulate your system. It can be overwhelming. I think another reason it can be overwhelming, and it can be scary, these events, it's easy to be scared of astrological events, is because they are a very confronting reminder that we are small and we are relatively young. Right? These planets are so much bigger than us, literally. They're so much older than us, literally. And they're a reminder that there are things we can't control. And that, I think, is something that can scare us really easily. So it's not necessarily that the eclipse is scary. It might be this kind of undercurrent of, no matter what we do, today the moon is going to move in front of the sun and we can't control that. And it's easy to project meaning onto that out of the place of fear of, oh my God, there are things in the universe I don't control. There are things in life that I don't control. So just being aware of, these kind of deeper currents that we might not be aware of, that are a little bit harder to see, right? This is a confronting thing about what we do and don't control. This is a really beautiful canvas to project onto, and to be mindful of that, and to use the canvas that we project on as an opportunity to see, what is it that we're projecting? What is it that's there inside of us that's excited to come out and be seen? So that was a whole lot. And I invite you to take a breath. And if you take anything out of this, this is an invitation to let this be whatever it is. To experience this either with the meaning that we project onto it, or to explore what it would be to experience this as a magnificent neutrality that doesn't necessarily have to mean anything in order to still be experienced as magical. Okay, I'm going to leave you with that for today. I'd love to know how this lands for you, if this felt relevant, what your thoughts on this are. You're welcome to leave a comment on this if you'd like to. All right. Until next time, I'm wishing you well. Namaste.